Nation in Conversation, taking you on a journey through the South African countryside. Proudly sponsored by Monsanto, Nedbank and Senves, in association with Hinterland and NWK.
Hello and welcome to Nation in Conversation. Any journey through South Africa wouldn't be complete without including our incredible wildlife. The game industry is fast-growing and rapidly developing and also offers the most amazing tourism opportunities. This is what we will cover in today's program. In Homegrown, we have an interesting discussion with wildlife photographer Morkel Erasmus, an outstanding talent that sheds some light on why South Africa is the ideal environment for any photographer. We also visit Piet Warren on his farm Sable Park near Gravelotte. Chris Burgess then joins me in Context for his opinion on this industry. In Dialogue, Theo investigates why this industry is so popular and looks at the challenges that have to be overcome. We also have a special feature on rhinos, not to be missed. South Africa remains a very popular tourist destination with the most awe-inspiring photographic opportunities. This pastime, of course, injects the tourism industry. We stopped over at Morkel Erasmus, a South African wildlife and landscape photographer who is passionate about the natural heritage of the African continent.
I would say nature photography is a fast-growing industry/hobby, mainly because of the availability of cameras these days. The DSLR systems that you can get at a decent price has got amazing technology in there, and lots of people are merging that interest in photography with their love for nature and going camping and going to the bush. It makes for a good combination to escape the urban jungle and go into the real jungle. I think what makes South Africa so popular is the wide diversity of animals and ecosystems we have. The biodiversity is fascinating. And there's so many national parks and reserves where you can go and ply this craft and spend some time in nature. And I think from a tourism perspective, what makes it interesting is the wide array of options we can provide for tourists. The one being you take a bakkie or SUV, you go and self-drive and camp in the Kalahari or in the Karoo or somewhere. Or you can go to a luxury lodge in the Kruger and be pampered and be driven around. And there's also the option of going on a formal photo safari with a professional to coach you from amateur to professional level as well. I've always loved wildlife and nature. I think it comes from my upbringing, which I was brought up by two teachers who had lots of holidays to take us on, but obviously we didn't have the money to go overseas, so we often went to Kruger and to Drakensberg and these places, and Namibia and the Kalahari. And my love for nature and animals developed there, and then when I picked up my first camera, it just clicked for me. And I love showing people what fascinates me about nature, and that for me a still image showing something that tells a story is very powerful. And the other thing I think that makes it interesting for me is the unpredictability. Anything can and will happen. It's not like when you photograph people you can tell them how to pose and what to do, but with wildlife some days nothing happens, and nothing happens for a few days, and then one day everything happens, and you've got to be ready for that, and that makes it exciting. Advice I would give young and up-and-coming photographers would be to consume as many wildlife photos as you can. Go on social media, go on photo forums, go visit your local photo club and see what people are doing with their craft, what kind of photos they're taking. And that's one way to learn and to improve your own craft. And then also the best way to learn is to be out there, to get out there as often as possible. The more you practice, the luckier you get, right? A la Gary Player. But you can only get the photos if you're there. So take the time, spend time in nature, learn to get to know your gear, get to know how to use it to the best of its abilities, and just enjoy it.
Piet Warren is well known in the game industry. Here on his farm outside Gravelotte, he tells us more about this growing industry.
The word game farmer didn't exist 20 years ago. It has totally exploded. The government changed the legalization of wild animals, which made them private property if properly fenced. This created an unbelievable demand for good quality genes. Good quality genes means animals with bigger horns, with the ability to reproduce those bigger horns. Now, very few people know that there are 60 million registered hunters in the world. These registered hunters, 9,400 of them visited South Africa last year and came and hunted between, I would say, 6 to 12 species per person. The game industry then started finding out that you get paid more for a bigger animal with longer horns than a shorter one. That made the farmers start selecting for bigger horns, and the whole game industry was born on the dream of breeding longer and bigger animals. It's not only stimulating the farming, it's stimulating the tourism business too. So the whole game industry is been one of the fastest growing economies in agriculture in the last couple of years. The long-term goal is to select good quality animals and make these animals available to the hunters in the world. When we started, the average sable in South Africa was, on my farm, was 38 inches. The average sable on my farm now, 22 years later, is 48 inches. This has made us one of the biggest success stories you can ever think of for having bred these animals that much longer in such a short time.
Did you know there are some 10,000 privately owned game farms in South Africa that house 12 million wild animals across 20 million hectares?
South Africa is synonymous with its wildlife, and it remains a magnificent experience for locals and foreigners alike. After the break, Chris Burgess joins us for his weekly opinion. Welcome back to Nation in Conversation. Agricultural issues affect all of us day to day. Remember to make your opinion count and join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter. With me is Chris Burgess from Landbou Weekblad. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you.
Chris, owning game has become quite a political thing. I mean, Cyril Ramaphosa has often had his ownership of a very expensive buffalo used against him by his opponents.
Yeah, I don't quite understand that, because I mean, if you investing in mining, I mean, or you're investing in any other lucrative sector, game farming is lucrative. I mean, why wouldn't you want to invest in game farming? And I mean, you know, Cyril Ramaphosa is not the only one. I mean, we've got Tebogo Magashua. He's the chairman of Talis Holdings. I mean, he's a big investor in the game industry with Edwin Claassen, and he's now investing in other sectors of agriculture. He's just made a big investment in the deciduous fruit industry, and I mean, this is what we need. We need black investors in farming. So, I mean, I don't quite get that. I think it's opportunistic, and I don't think it's quite fair, quite frankly.
But why should the ordinary man on the street care about game farming?
Well, if you look at the entire industry and you look at it in its entirety, I mean, you're looking at a 200 billion rand industry. And the interesting thing about game farming is a lot of a lot of South Africa that you can't farm commercially with cattle or sheep. I mean, you can farm game because they're so adapted. So we've got about 20 million hectares that were previously only marginally farmed that are now part of the mainstream green economy. Also, you know, it's a great job creator. The game industry alleges that they create 3 times as many jobs as the commercial livestock sector, and they also pay better because it's such a lucrative industry.
So what makes an animal expensive?
I think it's scarcity. You know, when you had the color variants, there were only a few of them. You know, your black springbuck, your copper springbuck. There were a few of these animals. Everyone started breeding it, and the price came down. But the hunting industry is still the biggest part of the game industry, and hunters want horns. So animals with exceptionally long horns. So if you look at a kudu, there are many kudus with long horns, but there are very few that have got horns longer than 60 inches. So those animals are very scarce. People are prepared to pay for them because you can breed them, and you can breed animals with more horns, with long horns, which hunters are willing to hunt. So I think scarcity is the main driver of the industry.
Do other African countries also have game, and are they doing as well as we are?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. South Africa and Namibia are the only countries in Africa where personal ownership of game is actually allowed. You know, if you look at Kenya, when they abolished hunting and the trade in live animals, I mean, ever since then they've lost about 80% of their game. So no, I think there's a huge potential in Africa for sustainable game farming. For some other reason, it's not happening, and I think that we are in a really fortunate position. Everyone wants to come and hunt in Africa. I mean, it's a international hunting destination, and we're incredibly well positioned. Our only problem is that we're losing quite a lot of our market to Namibia, and that's something that we're going to have to look at a lot closer.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
After the break, Mpumelelo takes the discussion further, and we bring you a special focus on rhino conservation. Don't miss it.
Welcome to Nation in Conversation. With me today is game breeder Danny Minar to shed more light on this flourishing industry. Welcome, Danny, and thanks for your time.
Thank you.
You know, Danny, the game industry is full of all kinds of controversies. Who will forget that our Deputy President, Cyril Ramaphosa, once got a public flack about him bidding for a buffalo worth a couple of millions of rands, and he was forced to apologize. Didn't that stigmatize the industry?
I don't think so. I think it was part of Deputy President buying a buffalo with very, very special genetics. And I'm on a side for that. I never had paid that for a buffalo because I haven't have that money. But if you have that money and you can buy that type of buffalo with that genetics, in the end, you will be rewarded for that. Because that type of buffalo are very scarce in the world. And that's the reason I think he was willing to pay that money for that buffalo.
Well, if that's the case, then it means he might have missed an opportunity to explain to South Africans the value of the industry.
I think it's so. And if you're in the public eye, then there are certain things you can't do and you don't do. And yes, it's a pity that he didn't buy that buffalo.
But why do these things matter, after all? I mean, people think about, well, there's lots of problems in the country, poverty, lack of jobs and all of that. And then suddenly somebody is talking about, you know, millions of rands just to buy, you know, an animal. Is there a link between the problems that are there in society, jobs, you know, development, you know, poverty, with game farming? Yeah.
I think there are a lot of opportunities. I think we receive a lot of foreign capital into South Africa because of hunters coming to hunt in South Africa.
Yeah.
These guys need food, these guys need places to sleep over. And the hunting industry is really a job creator. Because if the animal has been hunted, it must get slaughtered, and then it must get to taxidermy, and a lot of people working there. So in the end, South Africa is really big in the hunting market in the world. We receive a lot of foreign people and capital, and that creates jobs in South Africa.
So there's clearly a link between the problems we have in the country and the success of the game industry. But people still see it as an elitist industry, an industry for the few. Are you able to explain why it's important for all South Africans?
I think it's important like the citrus industry. 80% of South Africa's citrus we export to other countries.
Yeah.
But we get foreign capital and we employ people. Yeah. I think the same happened in the hunting industry. We got farms in South Africa, which is not arable land, which is not good for grazing for cattle and sheep, but it's good for wildlife. Yeah. And that's a way of getting more money out of land into out of the farms and getting into South Africa.
So we don't get our land wasted and with nothing to do with it. So we put it to productive use by game farming.
That's very important.
And anyone can enter the industry.
Anyone can enter the industry. And you don't need to have 20 million rand to buy a buffalo. Today I can buy buffalo for 120 and 140,000 rand. Yeah. So it's still a lot of money. But those animals are ending up in the hunting market. You will buy, a hunter will pay $10,000 to hunt a buffalo in South Africa. Yeah. And it's very expensive for the South African people. Not much of South African people can pay that. Yeah. But for foreign people, it's not that much money to buy to hunting a buffalo. Yeah.
A lot to discuss there, Danny. But thanks for sharing your views on the industry. And let's hope that it can grow and more people can learn more about it. And our Deputy President can in future be an ambassador for the game industry instead of shying away from the issue. Thank you very much. Our team visited John Hume. He's a South African rhino farmer who owns more rhinos than anyone else in the world. Let's have a look at the amazing work done there.
I became interested in breeding rhinos about 20 years ago when I realized that they were one of the species that were being persecuted and slaughtered in Africa. I have a weakness in my personality that I go for the underdog, and the rhino is certainly, as far as natural game animals are concerned in the world, it is one of the biggest underdogs. So slowly but surely, I became a rhino custodian and a rhino breeder. From a management point of view, we divided up into camps that are about 430 hectares in extent. 430 hectares, we have about 40 breeding cows, and then the breeding cows all have calves, and some of them have the bigger calves and the little calves. And then we've got some breeding bulls and some young bulls that are waiting to be breeding bulls. So on average, around about 100, just over 100 rhinos in a 430 hectare camp. But then of course we have to have bull camps separate from the breeding camps because we have far too many bulls for what is needed. And this is one of the reasons why you find so few people who want to breed rhinos. I actually breed 54% males and 46% females. The males are absolutely worthless as far as income goes. I need one male to 10 or 12 females. And that is where, unfortunately, it comes in that a rhino is worth more dead than alive. So as soon as you have an unscrupulous person owning a rhino male, he's going to look at it practically, and he's very, very quickly going to come to the conclusion that his male rhino is worth more dead than alive. So unfortunately, the same applies to female rhino. They are worth more dead than alive, which is one of the absolute stupidities which our current program with rhinos has led us to. It makes no commercial sense whatsoever to breed with rhinos. That is the biggest reason why the rhino is a loser, is because the world does not see that it could actually be one of the most profitable animals for people to breed with. It could be. If we were entitled to utilize the horn at what we think is a market value, rhinos would be a more profitable animal to breed than most other animals that we are breeding. One of the best ways to improve our rhino breeding in the future would be to allow our communities to be rhino owners and breeders. The communities have a vast amount of land. They are looking for an income. In general, they are very poor people. But under the current circumstances, there's absolutely no sense in trying to make a community into a rhino breeder or custodian, because you can make no money out of it. He's going to be the first one to poach his own rhino. It's madness. However, let us get to where we can use the horn and we can empower our communities with rhinos. A community with about 40 rhinos will definitely build its clinic, build its school from the 40 rhinos. It will get a much bigger income from its rhinos than it gets from its cattle. With regard to fulfilling the demand, I simply do not understand or accept the argument of people who say we will never fill the demand. The government has about 22 ton of rhino horn in stock. I have 6 ton in stock. There are over 300 other commercial farmers who own rhino. Commercial farmers alone own over 6,000 rhino in this country. So if we used our stockpiles to feed into the market for the next 5 or 6 years, whilst we built up our numbers, unlike currently where we are breaking the numbers of rhinos down, whilst we built up our rhinos, we will be able to supply that market. I also believe very much in the supply and demand theory. The less rhino horn we have coming on the market, the higher the price will go, the more money we'll have to protect the horns. That is the problem with rhino at the moment. They are not worth protecting. Farmers can't afford to protect their own rhino. The vacuna in South America is an ideal example of where you don't have to kill an animal to use its products. But vacunas were down to 5,000 in the world about 40 years ago. They were being shot, poached and shot for their pelts. Their pelts were sent to Italy, where they were processed into very, very expensive garments. The world saw the common sense there. They persuaded CITES to drop the vacuna from CITES 1 to 2. Instead of killing the vacuna, they just corralled them every 2 years and shaved their wool off. In 40 years, the vacuna has gone from 5,000 to over 400,000. That rescue is waiting for the rhinos.
Certainly food for thought there. Very good work being done to conserve our rhinos. Back to you, Rosie. Until next week, goodbye.
Thank you, Mpumelelo. Next week, we take a look at the South African red meat industry, certainly a favorite for any South African that enjoys a good braai or a Sunday lunch. Remember to join the conversation, exercise your right as a consumer. It affects us all. Goodbye.
Nation in Conversation, taking you on a journey through the South African countryside. Proudly sponsored by Monsanto, Nedbank and Senves. In association with Hinterland and NWK.